See, the tricky part of this is I'm trying to use my laptop as a teleprompter, but it's not at the same level as the camera, so I'm trying to memorize it and read it and look at the screen, but I suck at that. So yeah. Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, Matt here with Tug's Models, and welcome to the obligatory 2020 end-of-year wrap-up video. So I originally had planned to script this out and have it be a bit more polished, but as I got into the editing, honestly my read of the script just wasn't all that great, and trying to balance looking at the laptop and looking at the camera and looking at the laptop and make it not look like I was looking at the laptop, it was just a catastrophe. So instead, we're just going to wing it. Now, I think we can all agree that 2020 was a hell of a fucking year. And outside of the world falling apart and Mando Season 2 being pretty damn solid, and not having the joy of going to movie theaters and all that kind of stuff, my year at the bench was actually pretty successful. So this year I managed to complete 5 builds, which, to put in context, last year I finished 6, but 2 of those were February finishes that I'd been working on since the closing months of 2018. And in 2018, I believe I also finished 6, but 3 of them were 1/72nd scale, so they don't really count. And 2017, I finished 3. The only substantial one I finished was another February finish, and that was Tamiya's F-14 Tomcat. So there's been a bit of time in the wilderness in like 2017, 2018. 2019 was pretty solid. This year I think was even better. So let's walk through quickly the ones I did finish, and then all the ones I didn't finish, and talk about some hopes for 2021. So my first completion of 2020 was Tamiya's 148th P-47m Thunderbolt. And the scheme I chose, Fireball with the 63rd Fighter Squadron, is one that's been a bit of a white whale for me for quite a while. Like, I've literally had decals of it since I came back to the hobby and was like, I'm going to do this fucking one. Because not only is the blue-on-blue camo scheme of the 63rd just fantastically unique and really cool looking, so is that Fireball nose art. It's just awesome. And I'm super happy that I made the plunge to not trust the decals and instead try to make that happen with paint and masking, because I did, and it looks awesome, and I'm happy with it. I think my one come down, though, is that the kit is maybe not as superlative as my rose-colored nostalgia glasses thought it was. When I built the jug, last time I did the bubble top was, I think, 2011. And back then it was like, oh, this is amazing, this is the best kit ever. You know, at the time I'd built, like, the Accurate Miniatures Dauntless, a Zvezda LA5, and some Hobby Boss Wildcats. So I didn't exactly have a lot to judge it against. And looking back now, it's like, yeah, all the problems that I saw this time out were completely evident on my build from 2011. I just didn't see them because I didn't have the experience to see them. But just to lay out a few of them, there's no ignition ring molded onto the engine. That's fun. There is a bit of a wonky fit with the windscreen to the fuselage. It's definitely not up to where Tamiya's at these days. The dorsal spine fits better than the trumpeter kit, but it's not perfect. Yeah, and so just a couple things like that kind of brought the kit down a few notches in my estimation. I still think it's the best 148th jug. It's a great kit. It's just not. It's not 100 like I have been going around for the last decade saying it is. But it was still a fun build, and honestly, I am nowhere near done with my jug building. But I will probably be making a return to 1/32nd scale and doing another trumpeter kit, because for all its flaws, it's still cool, and it's still got the presence of 1/32nd scale. So speaking of 1/32nd scale, my second completion of the year was Trumpeter's big-ass A6E Intruder. And this is another white whale subject for me. The Intruder has been my favorite carrier-based aircraft basically since I was a kid. The 1-2 punch of Flight of the Intruder and Desert Storm, which basically both kicked off on, I believe, the same weekend, back in February of 1991, just cemented that thing as like, ooh, it's ugly and functional and amazingly effective, and why the hell did they retire it in the mid-90s? And I've always wanted to build one, and I've always kind of like stepped up to the line and then backed away. I actually started that big intruder 5 years ago and backed away. And so this year I figured, fuck it, I'm knocking out these white whales. Time for the intruder. And it was a lot of work, from filling the rivets and fitting the seamless intakes to, basically scratch building a AGM 123 Skipper 2 missile, to dealing with all of the fun of multiple ejector racks and filling a bunch of panels that honestly should have just been molded closed to begin with, to fussing with a shitty nose gear, to dealing with the failed Edward decals on the LAU-10 pod and having to send out for replacements, to getting my first go at replacing kit cockpit detail with 3D printed switches and knobs, which it's going to be tough for me to not do that in 1/32nd scale from here on out. And overall, I am very pleased with the way it came out. It could have gone sideways so many different times. It did go sideways a couple times, but I think I pulled it out, and now I have a big ass, pretty cool looking intruder sitting in my display cabinet. So that was a fun one. As the intruder was winding down, I dove into another project, which I called the Pony Bash. And the idea was to basically check out Edward's new 148th Mustang and compare it with some of the newcomers that have popped up in the past few years and just kind of see how they all stack up. And so I had the Edward P-51D5, I had the Airfix F-51, and I had the Meng P-51D, whatever it was. I think it's like a D25 or something like that. And the Airfix and the Meng both got booted pretty fast. And when they did, I figured, okay, well, if neither of them stand up to the Edward kit in pretty much any way, how does the old Tamiya kit stack up? And that gave me the idea of like, well, let's see how the old Tamiya kit builds for one. Let's get some practice with doing an all aluminum lacquer finish as opposed to the lacquered wings, bare metal fuselage. And I wanted to see if I could replace the less than optimal Tamiya windscreen, which is like glass to plastic basically, if I could like cut out the coaming and replace it with the Meng windscreen instead. And so I went ahead and did all that, and that gave me 2 Mustang completions on the year. Of the 2, the Edward is far and away the better kit. The Tamiya kit is still solid considering it's 25 years old, but it's 25 years old. And so it's missing a lot of the detail. It's missing some of the finesse. Some of the parts just are chonky and just don't hold up anymore. So it's still good, but I mean, it's like, honestly, for the $20 you'd probably pay to track one down, you can pony up another $5 for the Edward kit, which is way better. And I believe you can build pretty much any variant, depending on which boxing you buy of the Edward kit. You can buy pretty much any variant, any service era that you can think of. Like, my D5 came with rocket tabs, so if it had a filleted tail, then I could go ahead and build it as an F-51, for example. I believe it even had the wide cuffless props from the Korea era. So, yeah, there's really nothing standing in its way at the moment. The only weak spots are on the Edward Mustang are the upper cowl and underneath the radiator, where the detail fades off as it heads towards the center. That's pretty much it. But the underside of the radiator, who the fuck's going to look there? On top of the cowl, that's usually painted in an anti-glare finish, so it's going to be olive drab or black, or I think the Swiss had like dark blue. Anyway, it'll be buried compared to all the other surface detail that'll be popping out on the bare metal. So those 2, both interesting in their own ways, both finished, and they count towards the total of 5. The 5th one is a tank, which I don't actually finish all that many tanks. I start a lot of tanks, but I don't finish that many. But it is Ryfield's T-34-85. And overall, this was a fantastic kit. Ryfield, I think, has knocked it out of the park, not only with engineering that, in this case, feels downright Tamiya-like in some ways, but also with surface detail that is just maybe some of the best I've ever seen in a tank. Like the weld detail around the hull and the turret, amazing. I have not seen anything that touches it to this point. So overall, yeah, high marks to them for putting this kit together. Where I ran into trouble was two areas. First, I decided I was going to replace the fenders with photo etch fenders, which I did, and they look pretty cool, but they easily doubled my build time. Having to remove the fenders from the kit was a bit of work in and of itself. Then having to fold them all, fit them all properly, beat them up and everything took extra time, and then having to put in the tie downs that wanted to basically snap off under any kind of pressure, which makes them tough to use as tie downs, added a whole another layer of complexity on top of that. So that slowed my build quite a bit, and if I were to build another one, I'd probably end up leaving the fenders on. Maybe just not adding the sort of like the front end cap kind of things. The other place that I got tripped up on the T-34 was in the painting and weathering stages. And a big part of this is what I'm calling a lack of vision. Like, I just never really had a full vision for what I wanted the tank to look like in the end. The only thing I knew I wanted from the get-go was to paint in Cyrillic script on the side Antifa, just for some fun. And to watch people's kind of, cocked dog head, like, what sort of reactions to it. It's been a blast. But I didn't really think through what I wanted the weathering to look like, where I wanted it to be in service, like none of that. And so as I got into the paint and I got into the weathering, without that clear vision, I just sort of fumbled around, and that led me into some trouble spots. It led me into putting mud on too early and having to go back and do other stuff around the mud. The mud I put on at first was way, way, way too light, and that still shows through at the end of the build, much to my frustration. But at the same time, I credit that build with helping expose my bad habits and deficiencies with armor, and it's basically set me on a course to tear that whole thing down and start from scratch in 2021. And so more on that in a little bit. So yeah, those are the 5 builds that I completed this year. How about we look at the ones I didn't complete? That'll be fun. So first up, there are the builds that are actively on and around the bench that just aren't going to get in under the temporal wire. Prime example of that is the Trumpeter P-40F, which is pretty much getting into the stages of weathering at this point, but there's no way I'm going to have it done in the next, 5 days, 4 days, whatever is left in the year. So it'll be an early 2021 finish. There's also the Icm Panhard 178 that I've been playing around with, and honestly, it's painted, it's ready to go for weathering, it's had its first wash, but I keep going back and forth over what I want the base and sort of vignette that'll set it up to be, and until I determine that, and until I have that vision, I don't want to get into weathering and maybe go down a path that I choose to not follow later on. So it's kind of sitting there waiting for me to sort out what I want that to be. The other things I have going on the bench right now are 2 figures. One of them is a 1/35th scale Scouter figure from Nuts Planet. She is underway, kind of initial color blocking and things like that. She is meant to go with the Panhard, and again, I have to figure out what I want that scene to look like exactly before I kind of venture further down the path. The other one is a 75mm sharpshooter figure from Nuts Planet, and that is probably the first figure I've worked on where I've felt, okay, I might have something here, but I've just kind of been slow rolling it and not trying to rush. And so she's also sitting around and will be finished sometime in the new year, but just not going to make it this year. So those are they will be finished, just not in time. Next, there are the ones that have fallen by the wayside, to put it kindly. There's the aforementioned Airfix and Meng Mustangs that got the boot. And there is the 148th HK Models B-17G Flying Fortress, which I started out earlier this year alongside the P-47m. And I believe my expectations for that kit were way too high. Having built HK's B-25 before, knowing what they can do, and then seeing what they did do with that B-17 was a hell of a come down. The absolutely shoddy interior work, the battle to get the fuselages and the sort of the upper spine part of the fuselage kind of all meshed together, the lack of gun mounts, just there were a lot of things that just really really tore through my bucket of fucks. And then I got to the wings, and the detail on the leading edges and the nacelles were out of register. And at that point, I was just done. I'm back in the box. So, yeah, that one just didn't quite make it. Thankfully, that's the only aircraft that went that far down the line before being cut off, because in the past couple of years, there might have been like 5 of those. So, just one, I'll take that. 2 other sort of kind of cast-asides from the year are the 2 figures that I bought to start cutting my teeth on painting figures, which is another white whale thing of mine. I've always been intimidated by figures. I've never been able to figure it out. Anytime I watch a video or read an article or a step-by-step, even if it's well explained, to me it comes across like that famous meme of how to draw an owl. You know, the one where it's like, draw 2 circles, draw the rest of the fucking owl. It's basically like that for me. So I picked up a couple figures and was like, okay, I'm just going to try it. First 2 I kind of got going, but they just eventually petered out. And one of them, a Byzantine Scoutatos, I actually went back and stripped the face one too many times and ended up melting some detail. So it's not quite as bad as the guy from RoboCop, but it's not pretty. So those 2 are probably going to hang around as maybe experimentation mules or things like that. I would love to pick up another Scoutatos at some point in the future, because I've got an awesome spearhead for that, the spear that I scratch built for him. But can't find any. And one thing I'm learning with figures is if you don't pick them up when they're available, they're hard to find later on. So the real mother lode of my incompletes for 2020 have never actually touched the garage bench. They've been part of the work from home bench. Because like a bunch of the rest of the world, I've been working from home since mid-March. And I've discovered 2 things about working from home. First is there are a lot of Zoom calls. Second, a lot of the stuff that I would do downtown when I was working in an office, when I was trying to crack a knotty problem or like, you know, figure out the exact phrasing I wanted to use for a specific piece of web copy or whatnot, aren't really available to me. Like, I can't get up and walk around downtown, or I can't go sit in a park and people watch. I can't talk to colleagues and, you know, wander off to the kitchen and have a conversation about things. And so I have found that working on armor kits is a great way to give my hands something to do and let my brain sort of freewheel in the background. And it has been instrumental in me staying sane and getting work done to the level I have been getting it done this year. However, I'm not really set up to, and I don't want to be set up to, go full bench operations when I'm working. I don't want to like airbrush or weather it. You know, it's just assembly essentially. And because of that, I have assembled a lot of tanks and a lot of armored vehicles that are still assembled, and they're basically at the primer stage, nowhere close to reaching the bench. And so I guess I kind of have to list them as incompletes, because technically they are works in progress that are not done. They are not abandoned. They are not actively on the bench. They're in this sort of like weird state of, you know, on deck limbo. But I have the list on my phone. Let's walk through the ones that I've done. First up is Asuka's M4A1 mid-production Sherman. Then there is Ryfield's Firefly 5C. And Tamiya's Korea-era M4A3 E8 Easy 8. And Ryfield's World War II era M4A3 E8 Easy 8. Then there's the Tacom M31 recovery vehicle. As you can tell, I went on a bit of a volute suspension kick for a while there this spring and early summer. Then moving on to the more modern side of things, there's Tacom's Flak Panzer Gepard, which is a Leopard-based self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. And it is a mean-looking bastard. It was a blast to build. I really enjoy Tacom's Leopard 1 design generally, and the Orochi workable tracks are amazing. But again, it is just sitting, waiting for attention, sadly. There's also Tamiya's M551 Sheridan, which I have plans to build as a transformer. It is also basically to that point of just sitting there waiting for primer. Then there's the Ryfield T-3485, which we've just talked about, and which was the one armor kit to achieve escape velocity this year. And finally, I also started and set aside Tamiya's KV-1, which I can't tell you what happened. The kit itself is a great kit. It's next level detail from Tamiya, better than anything I've ever seen from them in terms of armor before. And I had a metal gun for it, and metal tracks, and some really, really excellent fenders, photo etch fenders from ET model. Everything was going perfectly, and then one day, enthusiasm for the build just vanished, just completely gone. So maybe I'll pick it up in the new year, maybe I won't. We'll see. I think it depends on like if that enthusiasm returns or if like a very solid vision for what I want that kit to be returns. Right now it's not there. So that is the work from home bench that takes up, again, the mother load of my incompletes for 2020. Okay, so that's 2020. Now, what's in store for 2021? To be honest, I'm not sure. I love making lists and making plans and making lists of plans and then not doing a damn thing about them and going in some completely different direction. So anything I say may well change. And I often have the problem, especially with models and like, what do I want to build next? It usually turns into a case of my eyes being bigger than my stomach, and I'll list out like, here are the next 10 kits I want to do. None of them get done. And by the time I'm ready to start on a kit, that list is outdated and is changed. So it's really, really hard for me to, sit here and say, oh, well, I'm going to work on this and this and this. Yeah, it's not going to be that way. I can say once this P40 is done, which should hopefully be soonish in the next, week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that. I will be starting on a P38, and I am looking very forward to that. Outside of that, other aircraft I want to do this year, or next year, or this year, depending on when you want. It's very confusing. I don't know. I mean, there's the new Great Wall Flanker that's kind of got me interested, maybe. There's the potential that Zukimura will go beyond their early F4E and launch a late F4E, or fingers crossed, an F4G Wild Weasel, in which case I would drop everything and start working on that immediately. Other than that, I've got a Kitty Hawk Seahawk sitting in the, not a Sea, it's technically an Ocean Hawk, an SH-60F. I've got one of those sitting over here that I'm kind of tempted to start on. I know that Kitty Hawk and I have our issues, but at the same time, they tend to do a bit better with helicopters than they do with aircraft, and I think it's kind of like how Meng is much better at armor than they are at aircraft. Everyone sort of has their sweet spots, and for whatever reason, Kitty Hawk seems to have a sweeter spot in helicopters than in aircraft. So that might be a fun one to play with. Other than that, I don't know. I'll have to see what tickles my fancy as I get through the lightning and what kind of comes after that. On the armor side, I have big plans to basically break down the way that I build and try out a veritable rainbow of techniques, stuff that I've either tried half-heartedly before or just not really tried. I basically want to push myself way outside of my comfort zone, try all the things, figure out what I like, what I don't like, and slowly piece back together a process of building armor that works for me and that works better than the one I have now. I also want to delve further into figures and really figure them out. Fucking dad jokes. I've accumulated a number of really interesting figure kits and busts and things like that, and it's really just a matter of me just sitting my ass down and figuring out the way through that so that I can see where they need to go instead of following step by steps that make no sense to me. It's definitely a learning curve, and I feel like I'm kind of inching my way up it. Like, this Nuts Planet figure is far stronger than anything else I've done so far, and it's still in the blocking stages. So with every single one, I get a little bit better, and I figure out a little bit more of what I'm doing, and I want to keep pushing on that. I don't want to start it and then just drop it and let it fall off and lose all that momentum that I've been building. So hopefully 2021 will be the year of rediscovering armor and figuring out my way around figures and continuing to build some cool-ass aircraft. I am also hoping to do a couple different things with the YouTube channel, and that would include things like, in addition to trying to stick with these build videos I've been doing, Also doing some smaller, quick techniques and how-to type videos. Everything from spray discipline to how to work with stynylres to how to mix and thin paint. Just stuff that to me is kind of second nature or intuitive, but that I seem to get a lot of questions about. And so I think a quick video on like how to thin paint, how to tell when you've thinned it the right amount and whatnot could be really useful. So look for those to come alongside the continuing fun build video series. And finally, I'm also going to be bringing some armor content to the channel. Basically tackling that rainbow of different techniques that I want to work on to get out of my comfort zone and sort of rebuild my armor processes from the ground up. And I'm currently thinking of it something maybe along the lines of the way that I handled like black basing 201, for example, where it's like, let's focus on this technique and this technique and this technique and this technique. And I would caution everybody out there, don't expect like Uncle Night Shift level stuff out of this. I'm nowhere near that level. This will be much more like learn with me as opposed to learn from me. If you're learning from me, it will be learning from my mistakes and fuck ups and figuring out sort of the whys and hows of how these different things work and what I like about them and don't like about them and things like that. So that will be coming probably in, I don't know, February, maybe early March. It kind of depends how long it takes me to get the necessary kits sourced and built to the point that they can be painted and we can have fun with all of that stuff. So that just about wraps up 2020 and where I want to push and grow and learn in 2021. And if you all have any specific topics you would like to see covered, any feedback, any suggestions, whatever it might be, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. Unless you're one of those ninnies who's going to go on about expletives, in which case you can go fuck yourself. Later.